In 1935, the first all-African-American jazz band visited Bombay. Leon Abbey, a violinist from Minnesota, and his 7-piece band arrived in downtown Bombay to play at the prestigious Taj Hotel. Leon Abbey's performance at the Taj in September that year caused a sensation in the city. Leon Abbey's style was new, vibrant, and fast-paced, something Bombay high society could not get enough of. Pop music, as jazz was called back then, reached new heights in Bombay in the 1930s and in the 1940s. The presence of African-American jazz musicians like Leon Abbey and Teddy Weatherford in India inspired aspiring Indian jazz musicians. Eventually, these Indian jazz musicians would become pioneers in the story of jazz in India, and they would later contribute to the Bollywood music scene. Jazz was a sound that embodied Bombay for a time, and in this video, I want to talk about it. Nowhere in the subcontinent did the taste for jazz run as deep as in Bombay, a port city like New Orleans that was home to people from across the subcontinent and many other parts of the world. What I'm going to discuss in this video is a part of my ongoing review and analysis of the show Jubilee on Prime Video. This is a review of episode 3, and there are 3 major topics that I want to discuss in relation to this episode. Part 1 is going to be the rise and fall of jazz in Bombay. Part 2 is playback singing and the history of the Bollywood song and dance. And part 3 is the makeup men of Bollywood. Before I go on, hello, I'm Tass and welcome to my YouTube channel. Let's get into it. In this episode of Jubilee, Niloofar goes to a jazz bar or a jazz club to perform and search for a new patron. She performs a kind of cabaret number in the show. Cabaret performances were made very popular by the film actress Helen in vintage Hindi films, but this type of cabaret performance in Bollywood has had major ties to Bombay's real-life jazz age in the 1930s and in the 1940s. Cabaret acts brought in even more income for jazz musicians at Bombay's prestigious hotels, bars, and clubs. Whenever my family and I have visited, we have stayed at the Taj Hotel in Colaba. It's such a beautiful hotel. It's located right opposite the Gateway of India. But for me, it is also such a historically significant hotel, and that's why I love it so much. It has deep connections to jazz. The Taj Hotel is a heritage hotel, and it opened its doors to guests since 1903. It bore witness to the British Raj, Indian independence, and basically brought hot jazz to Bombay in the 1930s. Last year, I did the heritage tour of the hotel, and its jazz connections were discussed on that tour. And this was really the first time that I had ever heard about this. And here we see on the walls of the Taj a photograph of Leon Abbey from 1935. In the 1920s, many jazz artists from around the world were traveling to Bombay and Calcutta to perform. But it was Leon Abbey's band that will forever be a major highlight in the pages of Bombay's jazz history. In 1935, they were the first all-African-American jazz band to visit Bombay to perform at the Taj. The Taj manager at the time, an Italian man named M.G. Folletti, played an important role in introducing Bombay high society to the latest entertainers from around the world by booking them to perform at the Taj. These are other photographs from this tour where we were shown pictures and posters of the various society events that would happen at the Taj ballrooms. Here are some of the ballrooms. They have these massive chandeliers in them. Even in the 1930s, Bombay was a very cosmopolitan city because it was a port city. And like most port cities around the world, there is a melting pot of people and cultures. Some Indian women in Bombay had been quick to adopt Western fashions. Rouge and lipstick, for instance, now had a place in every society woman's handbag. The surest place to seek out the short-haired sophisticates, and indeed all that was considered chic in Bombay, was the Taj. Ever since it had opened in 1903, it had been the place where Bombay high society could savor the latest trends from around the world, including the latest culinary innovations, latest technology like lifts, laundry, and generators. This included hot music that became the latest global trend. American hot jazz emerged from New Orleans. It is the music that we most often associate with the Roaring '20s. Before the arrival of hot jazz Bombay, hotels, restaurants, and clubs employed bands. The arrival of the African-American jazz musicians in Bombay Bombay completely reinvigorated the Bombay jazz scene. Hot jazz was characterized by intensity, syncopated rhythms, expressive solos, and a driving sense of swing. Instruments like the cornet, clarinet, trombone, and piano took center stage, with each player expected to improvise freely within the ensemble. The music moved fast and felt urgent, as though every note mattered. It was also more small group driven. No conversation about hot jazz is complete without Louis Armstrong. In 1935, Leon Abbey and his musicians stayed in Bombay for 6 months performing at the Taj. Their audience were mostly high society Indian people and Europeans. There are no known recordings of Leon Abbey's performances in Bombay, but from newspaper reports at the time, we are informed that he played a mixture of swing and rumba. Another very popular American jazz man in Bombay was Teddy Weatherford. Teddy Weatherford was a legendary jazz pianist, and in the 1920s, he was a bandmate of Louis Armstrong. He spent a decade touring in Asia. Many African-American musicians who had worked together in Paris in the 1920s went on to tour Asia in later decades. In the 1920s, Paris was arguably the jazziest city outside the US. African-American artists were very popular in Paris in the 1920s. Leon Abbey and Crickett Smith were a part of this jazz revolution. They later came to India. Josephine Baker also found fame in Paris in the 1920s. After the First World War, many African-American soldiers were horrified by the racial discrimination that they continued to face in their own country, so they left to work and live in Paris as musicians. The French jazz scene benefited immensely from this. But by 1933, the French government imposed a law that restricted the number of foreign musicians who could work at bars and clubs in Paris. This forced many African-American musicians to leave for the jazz hubs in Asia, this being Bombay and Shanghai. Teddy Weatherford has a very special place in the pages of jazz history in India because he spent a decade in India playing in Bombay, leading a band at the Taj Hotel, and in Calcutta at the Grand Hotel. He basically performed with all the early Indian jazz pioneers. He was an iconic jazz pianist. He was born in 1903 in West Virginia. From 1915 to 1920, he lived in New Orleans and learned to play jazz piano. In the 1920s, he honed his craft in Chicago, and it was during this time that he was a bandmate of Louis Armstrong. Teddy Weatherford played a major role in exporting jazz to Asia. He left the US in 1926 for Asia. Not only did he play in India, but for a time in Shanghai and East Java as well. Teddy Weatherford moved to Calcutta in 1941, where he married an Anglo-Indian lady named Pansy Hill. After the racism of the US South, India seemed remarkably welcoming. Asked why he continued to live in India, he is supposed to have responded, quote, "They treat us white folks just fine," unquote. During his stay with his band called the Teddy Weatherford Band, he cut more than 70 records in India. On these records, he collaborated with many Indian musicians. He was so beloved that the Taj Hotel even created a pear-based dessert in his honor. Teddy Weatherford sadly passed away in Calcutta in 1945 due to a cholera outbreak. He was in his early 40s. He was so popular that more than 40,000 people reportedly lined the streets as his casket was carried to the local cemetery. In 1936, one of the most significant jazzy records ever made in India was recorded by Teddy Weatherford and the Symphonies led by Crickett Smith. Crickett Smith was an American trumpet player, and he led the band at the Taj Hotel after Leon Abbey. The record was called Taj Mahal. The record represents a fascinating convergence of journeys featuring musicians who were born in places as distant as the deep south of the US and Cuba, and who had meandered through Sao Paulo, Spain, and Indonesia before eventually coming together in Bombay. Another very interesting reason why jazz became so popular in Asia in the late 1930s was because of World War II. After the declaration of World War II in 1939, troops from England, Australia, and Canada, and basically the Allied forces, descended into Bombay as a temporary base as they were sent to other posts. Bombay was a part of British colonial India. The British government wanted to boost the morale of the troops in India, so they hired jazz bands and jazz musicians to perform to cheer up the Allied soldiers at these bases. This led to jazz musicians in India being very busy during this time. Also, there was an armed forces radio station that played music for the Allied troops to cheer them up. On this radio station, jazz was played a lot. Many Indian civilians were able to listen in to this radio station as well. Jazz records were also popular, but they were really only accessible to Indian high society because it was expensive to purchase these jazz records. Inevitably, local musicians would want to learn more from the American jazzmen who visited their cities. And these local jazzmen ended up adapting the music to incorporate local taste. This is exactly what happened in India. When hot music took off in India, Goans and Anglo-Indians dominated the scene. Owing to their early exposure to Portuguese and European culture and their music, Goan and Anglo-Indian musicians dominated this area. The popular names then were Frank Fernand, Rudy Cotton, Chris Perry, and Chick Chocolate. Since 1822, Goan communities have made a home in Bombay. The Portuguese neglected higher education for Goan people, but they established a system of parochial schools where Western music training was a part of the curriculum. Most Goans were Roman Catholic, and Goan boys were taught to play an instrument at Catholic school, usually the violin, and how to read Western-style musical notations. This is why, when hot jazz arrived in Bombay in the 1930s, many Goan men were already, quote, musicians of the British Raj, unquote, because they were able to play the latest Western music. They also found work at the courts of Indian Maharajas who liked Western music. There are so many iconic jazz musicians who were pioneers of jazz in India, but for the purposes of this video, I want to highlight 3 iconic jazz musicians in particular: Frank Fernand, Rudy Cotton, and Chick Chocolate. They were deeply inspired by the African-American jazzmen who traveled and lived in Bombay and who shared hot jazz with the subcontinent. Once they came to Bombay, American jazz musicians realized that Indian musicians had the skills to play alongside them, and they started to invite Indian musicians to play in their bands, teaching them how to play jazz the American way. These collaborations would often happen at the Taj Hotel, and these bands, often led by Teddy Weatherford and Crickett Smith, played a vital role in cultivating a jazz culture in India. Frank Fernand was a Goan man who was one of the first musicians to attempt to give Western jazz an Indian touch. He was a trumpet player, and in 1936, at the age of 16, he decided to dedicate his life to jazz. He moved to Bombay. In 1940, he was invited to join the Symphonies led by Crickett Smith. This was a very big deal for him because he would be learning from and playing with American jazz musicians. Later in the 1940s, he went on to play with Rudy Cotton and his band in other parts of India. By the 1940s, there were actually many jazz bands in Bombay. Rudy Cotton played the tenor saxophone. When Leon Abbey and his band came to Bombay in 1935, Rudy was fascinated with the jazz that they played. Rudy went on to make a record with Teddy Weatherford. He is heard on the track with other musicians. In 1939, Rudy formed his own band. Chick Chocolate was Goan, and he was known as the, quote, best equipped horn man around, unquote. His idol was Louis Armstrong. He tried to emulate him in every way, and he even tried to look like Louis Armstrong. I mean, this picture alone, this is Chick Chocolate, but he looks so much like Louis Armstrong here. Chick Chocolate came to be known as India's Louis Armstrong. He was very talented, and for a time he led an 11-piece band at the Taj Hotel. I do want to mention this woman. She was one of the few women instrumentalists on the Bombay jazz scene in the 1940s. She played at the Taj Hotel as well with an all-male band. Her name was Lucila Pacheco. I'm not sure if I'm saying her surname correctly, but I'll put the name up so you guys know. Lucila Pacheco. She was a part of a Goan family of musicians, and she married a musician as well. There are so many interesting pictures of her in the 1940s as the only female musician in a group of male musicians, and I just thought that she obviously led such an interesting life. At the time of partition in 1947, many Indian jazz musicians were concerned about their livelihood. The social landscape in Bombay had changed. To make matters worse, in 1949, the Bombay Prohibition Act was enforced and curtailed the consumption of alcohol. Despite there being bootleggers, the prohibition negatively affected jazz clubs, bars, and hotels where jazz musicians were employed. Prohibition had resulted in shorter contracts for bands, reduced wages, and fewer bookings. As liquor disappeared, the future of the cabarets that were a regular attraction at many hotels were also in doubt. Though Hindi movies would, in a few years, establish the, quote, cabaret number, unquote, as a flurry of hip-thrusting, bosom-heaving, and garment-shedding, in reality these performances were rather staid, even by the standards of the 1930s and 1940s. Despite this major shift in the social landscape in Bombay, Bombay, Indian people who really loved jazz continued to engage with the music. They created jazz societies. There was even an Indian jazz magazine in publication for a time called Blue Rhythm. In the 1950s and 1960s, many very iconic jazz men performed in concert in India. A very significant performance was when Louis Armstrong visited Bombay in the 1960s. But another major reason why jazz didn't become as popular in India after independence was because there were import barriers placed on jazz records from the US. It would have been very expensive and require a lot of effort to import the latest jazz records for the average person. There was also a shift in what people were listening to in Bombay. Film songs were becoming more popular. Jazz musicians eventually collaborated in this world as well. We're going to talk about that in part 2. But also internationally, pop culture was changing. From the 1930s to the 1960s, when jazz was the world's pop, it was the musical form that excited Bombay's elite. But by the late 1960s, the Beatles traveled to North India to spend 2 months at an ashram in Rishikesh. This made international headlines, signaling that Western pop culture was indeed changing as well. So, if you want to read an amazing book on jazz in Bombay, it has to be this book, Taj Mahal, Foxtrot, by the historian Naresh Fernandez. It is an excellent book. You get a CD with the book as well, so you can listen to the music that you are reading about, which I love. So I picked up this book in India after I went on that tour of the Taj, and we were told about this jazz connection that the hotel has. And I just thought that this is the perfect book to learn more about this topic. It's such a niche and fascinating topic, especially because it's kind of a forgotten part of Bombay history. I really wish we had movies about this, especially in Bollywood, instead of remakes. I wish we had more movies about this particular era in Bombay history. There was so much happening. There were so many different people, especially in the music scene. So there's also a section in this book that explains how Indian jazz musicians decided to pivot as Bollywood provided them with the work that they so desperately needed in the late 1940s and 1950s. They started to work behind the scenes on the musical scores of films and on the songs for Hindi films. This provided them with a steadier source of income, and they were at an advantage because they could read Western musical notation. Chick Chocolate was one of those musicians who was very involved in Bollywood. Interestingly, he can be seen in this song for the 1951 film Albela. They are kind of in the background there, but he does have a solo in this song. Not all jazz musicians were happy to be a part of the Hindi film industry and film orchestras. Many preferred the days of playing jazz live at Bombay's clubs, bars, and fancy hotels. And if you're enjoying this video so far, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. Something that most people know about Bollywood movies, even if they don't know much, is that Bollywood movies usually have songs and dances. This episode of Jubilee is very centered on the Hindi film song and on playback singing, which, like I said, is a very distinctive feature of Bollywood films. With the release of India's first talkie, Alam Ara, in 1931, sound officially became a part of Bollywood. Playback singing emerged very gradually during the 1930s and 1940s in Bollywood. Before the playback era, there was this. As shown in this scene in Jubilee, before playback singing, actors had live musical accompaniment while filming. A lot of Indian actors in the 1930s and 1940s were also accomplished singers for this reason. Before playback singing, actors sang their own songs on set, and the musicians played on set too, often hidden behind trees and other props. The song sequences performed by the first true All India superstar, K.L. Sehgal, are not great cinema, but the image of Sehgal sitting under a tree and singing from the depths of his soul a passionate song in Devdas is deeply ingrained in many Indians' memories. Visually static, the early song sequences evoke the experience of attending a classical music concert in which the relationship between the audience, in this case the camera, and the performer does not vary. Playback singing refers to a song being recorded in a separate venue, usually in advance, and the actors lip syncing to the song in the film. These songs are very often released before for the film in order to promote it. This cross-promotional role that Hindi film songs play is often overlooked, but songs are a major part of media promotion for a film. This setup essentially gives the Hindi film song an independent existence. This promotional role of film songs has meant that the popular music industries of India have generally taken a different trajectory than in other parts of the world. One of the distinguishing features of Hindi films is the inclusion of 6 or more songs that seem to interrupt the flow of the film narrative in ways that are superficially similar to the genre of Hollywood musicals. Following stylistic conventions that have largely been in place since the 1940s, film songs are written to fit the locational and narrative requirements portrayed in the film. Song sequences are often shot in exotic locations and can depict the celebration of religious events, portray the development of social bonds such as the act of falling in love, or represent a utopia. So this scene with Binod and Shrikant is one of my favorites in the series, and it kind of very easily encapsulates everything that I've been talking about. Shrikant is trying to sell the concept of playback singing to the businessmen in this scene. Shrikant says that he wants these songs to be more visually dynamic and interesting for the viewer. And this was something that Indian film directors were considering in the 1940s and 1950s. During this time, the quality of a good film director in Bollywood was based a lot on how they picturize film songs as well. The most talented filmmakers of the 50s like Raj Kapoor, Guru Dutt, Mehboob Khan and Bimal Roy were not only directors but masters of song picturization. In the 1951 Raj Kapoor film Avara, there is a 12-minute song sequence. After 1947, playback singing became very popular, and this led to the rise of Indian superstar playback singers. The audience at the time wanted to know who was singing their favorite songs in Bollywood films. This resulted in playback singers eventually being listed in the film credits. They weren't before then. The foundations of playback singing in Bollywood were set in the late 40s and early 50s. This time is generally regarded as the golden age of Hindi film music. In this episode, Jotwani Radio is collaborating with Bombay Talkies, but in reality, the relationship between Indian radio and the film industry was actually quite fraught in the 1940s and 1950s. The newly established Indian government did not really have a favorable view of the film industry. I discussed this in the last review and analysis of Jubilee episode 2. I'm going to put the link to that in the description box below. There was a push for more moral and educational programming, and Hindi films were not considered moral or educational by the Indian government at the time. I read an academic article where the writer argues that the quote evergreen unquote era of Bollywood music can be partially attributed to radio in the 1950s. Quote, among these critics was broadcasting minister B.V. Keskar, who implemented a 5-year ban from 1952 to 1957 on Hindi film music broadcast by state-run media outlets because he believed that film songs advertised the films. In order to circumvent Keskar's ban, listeners tuned their shortwave radios to Radio Ceylon's commercial broadcasts of international pop and Hindi film songs. In this period, the consummate hit parade in all of South Asia became Radio Ceylon's Binaka Geetmala broadcast. While the power of the Geetmala waned as All India Radio lifted the ban and introduced commercial stations in 1957, the writer argues that this period of the Geetmala and the ritual of tuning into a dominant hit parade may be one of the most important reasons why the songs of this period have been nostalgically dubbed evergreen. Hence, memories of these songs are tied both to the optimism of the early years of the Indian nation state as well as to resistance to its policies. And I thought this was such an interesting point of view. So let me know in the comments, what do you think? What era of Bollywood music is your favorite and why? So at this point, I do want to share my favorite vintage/retro item for this video. In every video in this series, I share something that a vintage film fan would actually love. So today, if you are watching from India, you probably know what this is. It is readily available for you to purchase in India, but for someone from the diaspora like me, this is such a treat. This is a Saregama Carva. This is a portable music player with preloaded songs on it from Bollywood films. I think it has over 5,000 songs, and basically you can charge it and play the songs on it. It has this retro look to it, and I think it has songs from the 1950s to the 2010s. The Carva even displays the details, so you know the movie the song is from, the singers, and the year it was released. I just think it's such a perfect gift for music lovers. There's so many songs on it to enjoy. You also also can get minis, and these have, I think, around 300 songs that you can buy as well. I got the black and white one, and this is my mom's, the red one. Both of these also have preloaded songs on them. So lovely to hear songs that you probably would have never stumbled upon from vintage Bollywood. If you look at it, you can see like the Legends Karwa has the iconic singers, Lata Mangeshkar, Asha Bhosle, Kishore Kumar. They're on the cover. Yeah, that's my recommendation. Definitely get it if you love vintage Bollywood or you're just kind of curious about the music from Bollywood. So the third aspect of this episode that I want to discuss actually deals with the opening scenes of the episode. Episode 3 of Jubilee starts with a flashback of Jamshed Khan getting his makeup done for his stage performance with his male makeup artist, a character named Maqsood, and immediately we have something to discuss. So for most of Bollywood's history, makeup artists were men, for both actors and actresses. They are affectionately referred to as the makeup dadas. It is hard to ignore the fact that men dominated the makeup artist position in Bollywood, and this is not a coincidence. It is the result of blatant misogyny. In 1955, a powerful Bollywood trade union approved a policy that banned women from working as makeup artists. Women were allowed to exclusively work as hairdressers instead. The chief concern was that if women were allowed to be makeup artists in Bollywood as well, male makeup artists would not get any jobs. Trade unions are a very powerful force in the industry, so it took around 60 years, but in 2014, a Punjabi woman makeup artist named Charu Khurana challenged the association's bylaws after she was rejected for membership. She claimed that these bylaws were unconstitutional, violating her right to equality. The Supreme Court of India found in her favor, declaring that the bylaws were indeed unconstitutional. This ended an almost 60-year ban on women in this field in Bollywood. In telling the association to remove the gender clause, the judge said, quote, "We are in 2014, not in 1935. Such things cannot continue even for a day," unquote. A male makeup artist wanting to remain anonymous but belonging to the association made this comment to the press at the time. She, meaning Charu Khurana, made numerous rounds of the association, but the president of the makeup artists wing refused to entertain her. Some of us admired her grit, but we were embarrassed to tell her about this rule which barred women. After all, who believes in these things in the 21st century, especially in a city like Mumbai? So we used to put her off, saying there were no vacancies for new memberships. Throughout the years, many women did work as makeup artists for Bollywood stars, but they would usually be hired privately by the stars themselves, or they worked as freelancers or in secret, while male union members would be credited for their work. Khurana said this to the press: "I wanted to fight back. I wanted to earn a livelihood in the field that I have been trained. The film fraternity knew about this unconstitutional practice for so many years, but no one resisted it." Many male makeup artists did create these lasting relationships with Bollywood actors and actresses and worked with them for decades, spanning their entire careers. Maqsood's character is definitely one of those makeup men who was a trusted person in Jamshed's life. Maqsood actually identifies Jamshed's belongings in this episode at the police station, and he's quite heartbroken when he realizes that something terrible happened to Jamshed. The actor Narotan Bain plays Maqsood so well. He has tears in his eyes, realizing that he cannot perform the proper funeral rites for Jamshed. It's quite a moving scene. By the end of this episode, we realize that it's actually his makeup man, Maqsood, who is going to fight for justice for Jamshed. We end with Maqsood noticing a Madan Kumar poster and realizing there was some foul play in this tragedy. I hope you enjoyed my exploration of jazz in Bombay. Such a fascinating time. I know there were other stories unfolding in this episode that were quite important, especially with Jay Khanna and with Sumitra, but I will deal with them in the next episode, review and analysis. That is going to be episode 4. So I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next one.